is Thursday, March 2nd. I am John Aravosis, and you are here for the Aravosis Report. This is my daily show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time U.S., where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine. Let me get the folks on TikTok rolling on my iPad. And then, as always, we wait a couple minutes just for folks to arrive because, as you know, with the internet, it takes people a little bit, but usually 2 to 3 minutes in should do it. So if you're on TikTok or somewhere else and you're watching this later recorded, zoom ahead maybe 2, 3 minutes and you will see us begin. But we always start with folks just sort of,
Microphone. Microphone. I was just saying we start with folks just kind of weighing in and saying where you are from, if you would. Sorry about that. The mic works. It just wasn't in position. Sorry about that. I will say my hellos again. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. This is my well, it's loud now because it wasn't even on before. This is my nightly show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine. We wait a couple minutes just for folks to arrive, so hopefully that will be shortly. TikTok, all the rest of you as well. Sorry, itchy nose, of course. My allergies like start on cue the second I go live. It's like, I'm allergic to every single one of you. No, just kidding. But give a little hi. I think it's kind of fun just to see where folks are from. So give a little shout out while we are waiting here. Flip my screen on TikTok. Thank you for that reminder, since TikTok is evil and shifts my screen every time. There we go on TikTok. Thank you for saying that. And how's it going? Thursday. Exciting. Weekend. I don't know. I mean, I work for myself. It's funny. If you work for yourself, weekends become a bit like Downton Abbey when the, when the Dowager Countess once, one of the guys Matthew was talking about, this is, mind you, back in like 1900 or 1917, whatever, when, the rich didn't work. And he was rich, but he worked as a lawyer and he was working, and the family was very shocked that he was working, and they're sitting at of course, nightly dinner. They're all in their tuxedos, and he tries to make it better and says, "Oh, well, I just do it Monday to Friday. I have the weekends free." And the Dowager Countess, who's the grandma of the family, and again, rich English family, 1917 or so, and turns and goes, "Weekend? What is a weekend?" Because of course, when you're rich, there is no such thing as a weekend because every day is the same. They don't work. But it reminds me of doing this kind of work. When you work for yourself, weekends don't really mean as much because you're still home, And anyway, it's kind of funny. All right, guys. Oh, we do have enough people on TikTok. Welcome, TikTokers. Okay, I was just waiting till enough of you arrived for us to start the show. I will start. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. This is my daily show where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine for about half hour or so, sometimes more, sometimes less. And then I take your guys' questions. On TikTok, you can submit the questions via the Q&A link that is in my profile. Thank you, Louie, already for the gifts. So use that Q&A link in my profile. The rest of you can use the comment box at the bottom of the screen. For the gift, I very much appreciate your gifts. I do this for free. I've been doing it full time since the war broke out. Thank you, Messi. And just decided I wanted to do this full time, use my internet skills, my journalism skills, my foreign policy background, and see what I could do to add to the debate over Ukraine. And hopefully on Ukraine's side, I will admit I am not impartial in terms of this, but I do try to give you guys the truth and my analysis of what's going on. So I very much appreciate the gifts on TikTok and the gifts on YouTube, because quite literally those gifts, you guys help me pay the bills. So thank you for that. Thank you, Grouchy, for the hat. All right, let me get rolling here. So just a quick little business before we start. Saturday morning and Sunday, I'm going to have some special lives, so to speak. Saturday morning is my typical live for my TikTok subscribers. One of the ways I'm able to, pay the bills is TikTok has a feature where you become a paid subscriber. It's like $6 a month or something like that. I get a portion. TikTok gets a portion. It's capitalism. That's the way it works. Ironic that it's capitalism with TikTok, but you know what I mean. But I do a special show Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time US, that only the paid TikTok subscribers can access. And we hang out and it's fun. We hang out and we talk for like an hour or so. It's just kind of a fun hangout. Sunday, I will do the same. We have a monthly hangout on Sunday over on Discord for the $25 and up monthly subscribers. Thank you, Andrew, for the hat there on TikTok. for the $25 a month and up subscribers on TikTok, and the moderators. All the mods are included. And same thing. We hang out, we chat. It's fun. So that will be Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern for TikTok. Excuse me. I'm going to screw it up already. Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time US on Discord. Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on TikTok. We'll talk about it again later just to remind you guys. So there was a huge explosion today in Kolomna, Russia. Now, this is a town that is about 60 miles southwest of, actually southwest I wrote. I think it's southeast of Moscow. And 60 miles means 100 kilometers or so. The Russians are a little bit freaked out. They've been freaked out for a few days now. This is the town where the Iskander missiles are produced. These are very important missiles the Russians have been using against the Ukrainians. And so far, nobody knows what happens. This story broke about 2 hours ago. What is interesting is yesterday we had the news that the Ukrainians appeared to have attacked around 12 different Russian towns around the country, mostly Western Russia, of course, or all Western Russia, within range of Ukraine, with drones. And they did drones attacks. Now, one of the stories I saw today said at least one of the drones had C4 explosives attached to it, which is a big deal. C4 is, quite powerful. Thank you, Cecil. What freaked out the Russians yesterday was one of the drones landed again near Moscow. And the Russians are getting increasingly concerned as to whether the Ukrainians are going to start attacking Moscow with their drones. Well, as a result, the Russians today started putting up more anti-aircraft weapons in Moscow around the metros of all places, which I thought was interesting. Thank you, Robert, for the gift there. But nonetheless, this is really interesting because at the very least, it's good psychological warfare from the Ukrainians, because by scaring the Russians into thinking the Ukrainians can reach far into Russia, especially into Moscow, it means the Russians now, thank you, Fred, for the hat, the Russians now cannot only focus on Ukraine. They now have to worry about Moscow, about St. Petersburg. They closed the airport in St. Petersburg a couple days ago too. Whether something happened or whether they simply worried the Ukrainians were going to do something, but you're now making them focus. Thank you, Bill, for the hat. You're now making the Russians focus all over the country, all these different towns, and they're having to beef up security in the different towns, and they're having to pay attention to intelligence in the various towns, and that starts to tax the Russians' resources, right? The Russians would much rather be focusing think of, Sauron, the evil eye in Lord of the Rings. Sauron would rather be looking for Frodo, not 12 Frodos all over the place. And in this case now, rather than focusing just on Ukraine, the Russians are now having to worry about all of their little towns and and their big towns like Moscow and all of the anti-aircraft stuff, and basically spending money and time and manpower and weapons and defense on all of their cities when they should just be focusing on Ukraine. So it's good. It's good. Now, excuse me. The other thing, thank you, Bonnie. My nose is running today. Thank you, Louis, for that too. There was some talk yesterday or the day before by General Hertling, who's an American general, retired, very smart guy. And Hertling was saying that it's possible that the Ukrainians did this 12 drone attack. Now, it doesn't look like there was much damage. They may have hit an oil refinery, but otherwise, either the Russians shot them down or the Ukrainians didn't have much of a payload. They didn't have much of a bomb on each drone. What Hertling said was, it's possible the Ukrainians were using these 12 drones as a test, as a trial run for something much bigger. Basically, wouldn't it be interesting if the Ukrainians did an attack against Russia eventually that was 30 drones, 40 drones, and going after 40 different towns or 40 different locations, which means the Russians would be just literally, with their heads spinning off. Who knows? It was from an American general. I thought it was interesting. Now, a little bit more here. Today, Secretary Blinken, who's the American Secretary of State, and the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov met today briefly for a little under 10 minutes at the G20 foreign minister meeting that's happening in India. India is hosting it now. Blinken said he had 3 messages for Lavrov, one of which was, we will continue to support Ukraine and you need to end the violence now in Ukraine. 2, he urged the Russians to rejoin the New START treaty. This is the remaining arms control treaty we have with the Russians. that the Russians basically just pulled out of, or at least paused, because they're trying to freak us out. The Russians are basically trying to use nuclear blackmail against us to get us not to support Ukraine. And by pulling out of the arms control treaties, they think they're going to scare us into thinking, oh my God, nuclear, blah, blah, right? Thank you, Edith, for that. And the final point, which was interesting, that Blinken brought up with Lavrov, the Russian, is Paul Whelan and the release of Paul Whelan. Paul Whelan is an American who has been imprisoned in Russia for several years now. He was there at the same time as Brittany Griner. Brittany got released. The Russians have been refusing to release Paul Whelan. And apparently Blinken said that we have a serious proposal on the table to the Russians to release Whelan, and he wants the Russians to consider it seriously. Another weird story today. Thank you, Canada Zen. Another very weird story today. And nobody quite knows what's going on with this story. The Russians are claiming that a Ukrainian sabotage group made up of Russians, okay, so made up of former Russian soldiers and everybody else, crossed over into the Russian state, or the Russian oblast, the Russian region of Bryansk. Well, let me show you on my handy dandy map where that is. Okay, you got the Ukraine map here. Bryansk is basically up here. I'm trying to get more or less. It's from what I remember looking at the map, more or less up here. Okay, so Ukraine, obviously, Kyiv, Kharkiv. Bryansk is like up here. So it's right across the Ukrainian border. The Russians claim a sabotage group of men crossed the border. And there's a lot of conflicting story here. The Ukrainians are saying, we know nothing about it. The Ukrainians are saying, we think it might even be the Russians who did it. It may be the Russians who actually sent their own men across the border to try to basically cause a scandal, a false flag, as it's called, where basically you commit the crime and you blame the other guy, right? The Russians are claiming these guys took hold of a Russian town, and for a couple hours at least, they held the town hostage. They killed civilians, all sorts of stuff. Obviously, we can't trust anything the Russians say on this. Like I said, the Ukrainians are saying they have no idea what's going on. Some of the independent war analysts, they say that at least one of the guys that appears to be running this effort is a Russian neo-Nazi, which is interesting. If in fact the Ukrainians were working with this guy, it would probably not be the wisest move to do public relations wise, among other things, because the Russians keep accusing the Ukrainians of being Nazis. So using an actual Nazi to fight would not be a good idea. But if you were Russia and you were trying to screw Ukraine in terms of marketing and public relations, you'd use a Nazi, right? If you'd want to basically have a false flag and have the Russians stage their own attack and blame the Ukrainians, you'd pick a Nazi, right? Because that's the guy that would be most embarrassing for the Ukrainians. Keep an eye on this story. Maybe in the next day or two, we'll get more information. Nobody knows what's going on. But I thought it was important to mention because it's an interesting story that's brewing at this point. Thank you for the gift there, Vernon. Bakhmut. So Bakhmut is a town we've been talking about a lot the last few months. Still very important to talk about. The Russians have been trying to take over the town for probably 3 months now, if not 6 months. Bakhmut is all the way over here in eastern Ukraine. You can see where my finger is. Russians control all of this in Ukraine. So basically, Bakhmut is right on the edge of what the Russians control, and then the Ukrainian territory. I mean, it's all Ukraine, of course, but the territory the Ukrainians still control. Heavy fighting going on. This is the town where the Wagner mercenary group has been taking the lead, the soldiers for hire. It's the town where they've basically been throwing prisoners at the Ukrainians and just letting them get killed, like in mass. They're just throwing prisoners at these guys. Up to 80% of the prisoners have been killed in these battles. I mean, imagine 80% of the men that you're throwing at a battle are getting killed. The Russians don't care, of course, but that's Bakhmut. Now, the town doesn't matter strategically. It is very important to the Russians, we think, for saving face. The Russians have been doing so bad in this war, as we know. The Russians have had no great successes to point to for months, and they'd like Bakhmut as a victory, even though it's a town of 70,000 people. The population is now down to less than 5,000 people. The Russians have destroyed the entire town, just like they did in Syria. They come in and they just destroy everything. But it at least gives the Russians bragging rights, they think, to tell the people back home, we captured Bakhmut. But honestly, I don't even know what to compare it to in America. It's like saying we captured Peoria. It just doesn't matter. But from a Russian, from a Russian perspective of pride and everything, they need to show some kind of victory. Now, there were more reports today that the Russians are moving closer, very slowly and at great cost. They're losing a lot of men and a lot of equipment, but they are moving slowly closer in, right, to taking Bakhmut. This was according to a Sky News analyst. The British Ministry of Defense had an interesting update about the weather and how it's affecting Bakhmut. And I wanted to tell you this because A, it's interesting on its face, but also we were just talking, I think yesterday or the day before, somebody had asked about the weather getting warmer. Thank you, Leanne. About the weather getting warmer and what that would do to the battle in Bakhmut. And at the time, I mean, I was just guessing, but at the time I said, I would think it's not very fun for the Ukrainians who are defending because they're in trenches like World War I and the trenches are filling up with water. But it's possibly even worse for the Russians because it's very hard to move forward when everything's muddy. Your vehicles can't move. It's a disaster. So if you're on the offensive, if you're trying to take land, it can be very difficult when it's wet. Well, it seems the British Ministry of Defense agrees with me. Let me read you an analysis they put out today, very short, about the weather in Bakhmut. As Ukrainian forces continue their defense of Bakhmut, rising temperatures are now creating the muddy conditions known in Ukrainian as bezdorozhya, limiting cross-country movement, CCM. Poor cross-country movement typically provides some military advantages to defending forces. I'll read more in a second. The idea here is if you're defending a city, in principle, you're sitting down, right? You built trenches. You've built barriers that you're hiding behind. You're in buildings as snipers. So you're sitting in buildings with the windows blacked out, waiting for people to come by to shoot them, right? You're not moving. So it doesn't really matter to you if there's mud on the ground. Now, it matters a little bit. It's hard for you to get new supplies in because the supplies are coming in on trucks that are getting stuck in the mud, right? It's hard for you to get new soldiers in to either replace you or to help you because those soldiers are on trucks trying to pass the mud. Thank you, Beirut, for the owl there. Nonetheless, it's even worse for the Russians because the Russians are the ones that are trying to come into the town and go block by block in their vehicles that are getting stuck in the mud. So that's what they're saying, how typically weather like this would help the defender. A little bit more. Daytime soil temperatures have risen and are now largely above freezing. As experienced since mid-February 2023, overnight freeze and daytime thaw, so at night it freezes and during the day things thaw out and get messy again, remains likely until next week. Forecast warmer than average conditions for the remainder of the winter and spring will further reduce this cross-country movement. So in other words, not only for the next week is it going to be thawing during the day, but through the spring now, they are forecasting warmer than normal temperatures, which means this could now be the beginning of the season where things get messy and it gets harder and harder for the Russians to advance. Let me get you this. It is almost certain that by late March, cross-country movement will be at its worst following the final thaw. This will add further friction to ground operations and hamper the off-road movement, right? Because roads are a little easy. Once you get off-road, you're in a muddy field, you can't move. Off-road movement of heavier armored vehicles, especially overturned up ground in the Bakhmut sector. So what gets interesting with this is, what does it mean for Ukraine's offensive, right? The Russians have clearly started, whether this is the offensive or one of their two offensives, the Russians, we now think, started their offensive a couple weeks ago. We also think the Russians started it because Vladimir Putin yelled at the troops and said, I don't care if you're ready. You're going to invade now. I want you to take the East, right? Putin did that before they were fully, thank you, Bonnie, for that, before they were fully ready in terms of the troops aren't trained. The troops don't have enough weapons. They don't have enough vehicles. Basically, now it's not clear whether the Russians ever would be ready, but they weren't ready. In addition, now we know the weather was not right. This is not the right time for the Russians to be attacking, but they're doing it. The question then becomes, when is the right time for Ukraine to attack? Because if this is going on through March, through the end of March, you could argue that maybe Ukraine should hold back until then. And in fact, I believe the allies, the West, NATO, has been telling Ukraine that, maybe you should hold back. No, don't hold back forever, but hold back just long enough until you get more of the tanks, more of the Bradley fighting vehicles, more of the new weapons that the West has promised. And at the same time, the Russians are just wasting themselves attacking you. They're dealing with the mud. And then once spring comes and the ground firms up a bit more, then go on the offense, right? Anyway, I think the weather stuff is fascinating because it really does it's just fascinating how it plays into your strategy for attacking. I will never know how to pronounce your name, by the way, just so you know. I always say Vivo. Input on Putin's meeting tomorrow after the Bryansk sabotage. Putin, I don't know what's going on with that. So there was, as we said, there were maybe some Russian troops who are not on Russia's side, who are on Ukraine's side, who maybe are working with the Ukrainian military. We don't know. These guys could be working with the Ukrainians. It could be a Russian ruse. It could be a trick by Putin. But it appears they may have crossed into Russia from Ukraine or just been in Russia and possibly taken over a town, done some sabotage, who knows. Putin is pretending he's very freaked out. This is terrorism, and canceled some trip he was on and is holding an important meeting to discuss this. So that's what the question is. It all comes down to what you think is really going on. I mean, if this is a false flag, if this is the Russians themselves who did this attack to basically say, aha, we said Ukraine was going to be invading Russia and taking our towns, and now they are. And now, for example, I could see Putin say, NATO, this is it. Give us a false ultimatum. NATO, we told you. We said you were going to take our cities, and now you are. And if you don't stop supporting Ukraine immediately, blah, blah, blah. My suspicion is Putin is going to give a lot of bluff, a lot of bluster in an effort to scare Biden, Macron, and Scholz, America, France, and Germany, to not give Ukraine any more good weapons, any more better weapons, planes, be careful with the tanks, this kind of stuff. That's my guess. The Discord. Okay, I'll do a quick little Discord pitch. As you guys know, every 2 or 3 times during the show, I give a little pitch about how I fundraise for the show. I do this full time, as you guys know. Sorry, there we go. I do this Roshan, there you are. I do this full time. I've been doing it full time since the war broke out. Nobody pays me. I'm not financed, but I am not rich either. So I have been surviving by your guys' gifts here on TikTok, your guys' gifts on YouTube, and by a number of different ways we've been raising money. I've got a store set up where we're selling cool kind of Ukrainian themed garb at store.aravosis.com. You can find all the links in my profile on TikTok. You guys can find all the links via aravosis.com. You can see on the screen. But another way we do it is via our Discord. The Discord's kind of fun. It's an online community where we all get together and can just chat sort of after the show, overnight, whenever, all over the world. We've got about 1,600 people. And one of the neat things we have there is an auction. We've been doing a daily auction of cool things from Ukraine. Thank you, Messi. We just finished auctioning off some airplane parts that were from a Russian fighter jet shot down over Ukraine. That box is gone. We don't have any more boxes of that. We've got, one of my favorites is the Zelensky sweatshirt. This is the actual sweatshirt brand that Zelensky wears. You've seen Zelensky, like when he met Biden at the White House, and everybody was saying, oh my God, he's wearing a sweatshirt. This is the sweatshirt. Obviously, it's not the sweatshirt. It's the same sweatshirt from the same company that Zelensky buys them, but very cool. Very comfortable too, by the way. I love this sweatshirt. Really comfortable. But we're auctioning these off over there on, thank you, G Money. Appreciate it. We're auctioning these off. And right now I'm auctioning off, I've got 2 more of these left. These are the Azov style bracelets. These are probably the most popular thing we've auctioned off the whole time. Only got 2 of these left. These were a limited edition in Ukraine. They're not making anymore. What's interesting about these, you can look closely. It's really neat. There's a piece of steel with the Ukrainian trident on it. It's a bracelet. But what's neat about it is it's steel from the Azovstal steel plant, which is the plant where 2,000 Ukrainian troops were defending themselves against 14,000 Russians and in Mariupol. Remember Mariupol? And this went on for months. And remember, the Ukrainians were just holding out, and people were comparing it to the 300 in Greece. Is that Thermopylae? I always forget the name. Just amazing fortitude of the Ukrainians holding out. So what the Ukrainians did is they took the steel from the plant, Ukrainian government, and made these bracelets. The sale of the bracelets went to charity in Ukraine for the government. We as well are auctioning these. Half the money from the auction is getting channeled back to Ukraine for aid, military and civilian. Half of it is going to support my work because quite literally I do this for free full time. So it's paying my bills. What is neat about, I'll get back to the news in 1 second. What's neat about this is the final batch. We got a couple of these. I've only got 2 left. These particularly were made from steel that the Ukrainian government used from the plant, and they set up an exhibit in Kyiv. It was right near this tallest Ukrainian flag in Kyiv monument. And it said something on it of honoring the troops. I don't have it in front of me. And they were trying to think what to do with it. And they thought, because it was the steel they used to make the monument, and they thought, let's make more bracelets out of it. So these bracelets, the one I'm holding and the other one, were literally made from the steel of the art exhibit honoring the Ukrainian troops in Kyiv. So just to make I love this kind of stuff. I like objects when they have history to them. So anyway, we're auctioning these babies off too. Go to my Discord. You can find everything on the Discord. We're auctioning other stuff too. I've also got a piece of the Berlin Wall that I did find that I'm going to be auctioning off as well, if anybody's into the history of it. But it's a piece of the Berlin Wall that I actually broke off, and I've got proof of that. I have lots of proof of me breaking it off because I was there working for the U.S. Senate at the time, and I just happened to be there like the weekend the wall was coming down. So anyway, we've got lots of cool stuff over at the Discord, discord.aravosis.com. Link in the profile, aravosis.com, link that you guys have there. Check it out. It's anyway, check it out because the Discord's fun, but it also supports my work, which I like too. But it's fun stuff. I also enjoy auctioning this stuff because I love that. Thank you, Carmel. I love the fact that with my contacts in Ukraine, we've been able to get really cool stuff, which again, to me, it's stuff that I think is cool. So hopefully it's stuff you guys do too. All right. Lilia has a super chat question or comment. Some Ukrainians think that Putin will use this to end the special military operation and start a full-blown war. I'm going to guess by this, she probably means this incursion we're talking about of these Russian troops who might be working for Ukraine that crossed the border into Russia today. To start a full-blown war. Some Russian propagandists have been talking about it for weeks now, preparing the public. Here's the problem. I don't know what a full-blown war means anymore, right? I mean, sorry, sip of water and we'll talk about this. If I were the Russian public, I'd be pretty pissed off right now if Putin said, well, I know it's over a year that we've been there. I know 200,000 Russian troops have either been injured or killed in this war. Horrific number. But I haven't really tried to fight the battle to date. But now that the Ukrainians sent these people across our border, now I'm going to treat this like a... Sorry, I'm scared. I always scare my dog. Sorry, Sash. I'm going to cover up. Sorry about that. When I get emphatic, I bang my table and my dog is sleeping underneath, so she always jumps up like, what's going on? But now I'm taking the war seriously, and we're going to declare war and have a real war. I don't know what that means. I mean, he could have a real draft. He could try, right? But what are they going to do if they draft everybody? I mean, we've already seen the Russian logistics suck. And by logistics, I mean, I know poor Sasha, she's okay now. The logistics suck. Logistics are, I always compare it to going on a vacation with your family when you would drive by car. Okay. Thank you for the gift there, the confetti D and the Hydro Slime Mel. You're going on a family vacation. You're, 2 spouses 4 kids, you're driving cross country, and you've got to plan it. And in the old days, we'd get out the map and you'd have to plan gas stations along the way. You'd plan where we're going to eat along the way. You'd have to plan to stop at toilets, right? You'd have to plan where are we spending the evening because the day is a 2-day trip. So we've got to stay at a hotel along the way. What hotel? All of this is logistics. And the same kind of thing, where do we get gas? The same kind of thing applies to troops. If Russia has hundreds of thousands of troops in Ukraine, somehow those troops have to get gasoline. They've got to get diesel fuel for their tanks and their trucks. Somebody has to feed those troops. Who's giving them 3 meals a day, right? If it's 200,000 troops, you need 600,000 meals a day. Who's doing that, right? It's incredible. Weapons. I fire my machine gun. I fire my tank. Where's the other weapons for my machine gun coming from? Logistics. The Russians have to bring in more weapons. Well, the thing is, the Russians suck at it. And we saw this with the initial battle. Remember when the Russians came in and they were coming down, attacking Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, that first month, and the Ukrainians basically blew up and stopped that 40-mile long convoy. What would it be, like 60 kilometers long, 40-mile long convoy that we were all scared because we went, oh my God, there's a 40-mile long convoy. It's so big of Russian vehicles. And it just died because the Ukrainians attacked it, but also the Russians suck at this. So if the Russians are really bad at helping this many troops, and they couldn't train them either. Thank you, Cheryl, for that. Remember, they couldn't train these guys. All the new recruits got like no training or a day of training. Right? They don't have enough guns for them. They gave them old rusty guns. They were giving them World War II machinery to operate. If the Russians don't have enough for the current troops, what are they going to do if they draft another 1 million men? Right? Thank you for the hat there, Jay Ticker. What are they going to do? Right? Where are they going to put? Remember the videos of the barracks and how the Russians, these guys were pissed. They were even posting their own videos. The Russian troops were pissed. The barracks they were being housed in were literally, it was disgusting. The toilets, there was just crap thrown everywhere, right? You're going to increase the number of troops by 5 times? Some of these guys, I remember some of the guys they drafted in, I forget where in Russia, but it was already snowing at the time. And do you remember the video when they took these guys and they dropped them in a field and they gave them, I think they did give them sleeping bags, gave them no food, dropped them in a field and said, we'll be back to pick you up tomorrow. And these were the new draftees. So like literally they just got drafted. They said, show up from your homes. So they showed up from their homes, put them on a bus, drove them to a field and left them for the night. And these guys were like, what the F? My point is, I don't want to belabor the point. If the Russians cannot figure out how to train and feed and arm and support an army of 200,000 men, how are they going to do it if they declare war and have an army of 1 million men? They've got an army of 1 million men, but what I mean is, 1 million men fighting in Ukraine. So a part of me is very suspicious of, what else can Putin do? Mind you, this is also the argument that a lot of Putin's defenders come up with. They say, oh, you just wait. And this is the defenders in the West. Thank you, Bonnie. Oh, Putin hasn't done anything yet. You just wait. He's holding the good stuff. And you're like, it's been a year. 200,000 of his troops are dead or injured, and he's still holding the good stuff. I would hope he's not holding the good stuff anymore at this point, or he's going to get thrown out of office, right? Any case. So who knows? But that's sort of my take on it, Lilia. I'm not terribly worried about it. I think if anything, Putin's going to make more threats. He's going to make more threats about, oh, this time we're getting closer to using nukes, right? It's going to be yet another bluff. That's my take. The Guardian. The Guardian's got kind of a freaky story up about Russian torture chambers in Kherson. Kherson is region up here. I'm not so good at defining the entire region, but the town of Kherson is here. And Ukrainians, I think Russians may do this too. The Ukrainians name the sort of capital of their state the name of the state itself. So the region is Kherson and the capital is Kherson itself. The Russians, when they occupied a lot of a lot of this region. They didn't occupy Kherson, the town itself, but they did occupy a lot of the region. And what an international group of investigators working with the Ukrainians has discovered more than 20 torture chambers investigated by them. Quote, the mass torture chambers financed by the Russian state are not random, but rather part of a carefully thought out and financed blueprint with a clear objective to eliminate Ukrainian national and cultural identity, said British lawyer, or barrister as the Brits say, thank you, Ellen, Wayne Jordash. Now, what's really creepy in this article, I'm just going to summarize it for you, but they said, and we had heard some of this at the beginning of the war. They found evidence that basically what the Russians did, they set up these torture camps, and they had lists when they came in. When they came in and invaded, they already had lists of prominent Ukrainians. And initially, they went after Ukrainians who could make a difference. So they were people in politics, people who were activists. For example, they had lists of people who were involved in the 2014 revolution that helped overthrow the corrupt sort of Moscow puppet that was the president at the time. They also have lists of cultural leaders, because think about it, like singers, people like that could have a lot of influence, right, with kids and things like that. They had lists of these people made up. They arrested them, they tortured them, and in most cases, either they killed them or had planned on executing them if they got them. The idea was, as they said, to literally destroy the Ukrainian identity. It wasn't just to, capture these people and imprison them. It was, these are the thought leaders and the political leaders of Ukraine, the cultural leaders and the political leaders, and the activists would be civil society leaders, we would call it, of Ukraine. They were going to wipe them all out and exterminate them in order to basically leave the public, but the public without any leaders, right? Really disgusting. And then they also went after them. So they were going to kill everybody at the top. Then they were going to arrest everybody, and they did. The next level down, which were people who knew those people. So associates of the political people, associates of the actors and the painters and the artists. And they were tortured as well and imprisoned. And a lot of them were simply, the plan was for a lot of them was to simply send them to Russia. So they weren't going to kill them, but they were going to get them out of Ukraine as well, so they could make sure that nobody was left behind. Nobody was left behind. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Any case, beep, 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 beep. Yeah, you're wrong, whoever's saying it's not here, son. No, you need to Google the story. I'm right. So 3, what else we got here? Slovakia. Okay. Okay. Some more, we're almost done. Some more fighter drone stuff that kind of drives me a little crazy. There's a lot of stories about, maybe Ukraine will get more tanks. Maybe Ukraine will get fighter jets. Some country says they're thinking of giving Ukraine something. And I read those and I just want to slap somebody. Slovakia is considering sending Ukraine 10 of its 11 Soviet-era MiG fighter jets. France says it is considering maybe sending some of its Mirage fighter jets that are really good fighter jets, but give me a break. I don't think either of these are true. I mean, we have seen up until now, and I think I even did a video on TikTok earlier about this, the problem in sending weapons and sending planes to Ukraine, and this is where I get pissed at my own government. I think, so much of my work. Oh, thank you, Matthew Wilson. I just saw that you pledged on Patreon. Thank you for that. I've spent 30 plus years, 34 years now working in politics in Washington, D.C. Well, working full time in politics. I also had internships before. And one of the things that helps you do is see things that other people don't see. Like, I'm able to see the patterns. I'm able to get a good sense of what policymakers are thinking. And it makes life very difficult because I like people like Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden's done a good job. But I'm able to see some of the BS that Joe Biden's doing with the war. And it pisses me off because I don't like it when politicians are playing games with me and think they're tricking me. And Biden and his people keep saying, no, we can't send F-16s to Ukraine. F-16s are the really good American fighter jets. We can't send F-16s to Ukraine. Do you know how long it'll take them to train on that? Everyone says it'll take them 2 to 6 months, not that long to train. It's so complicated to keep them up. It's blah, blah, blah. Everything's complicated and hard in this, right? As Ambassador McFaul, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia up until a couple of years ago, said the other day, he said, okay, then what about MiG fighter jets? Poland has MiG fighter jets. Poland offered a year ago to give MiG fighter jets to Ukraine. And what happened? The US and Germany both went, and it never happened. Those weren't MiG, those weren't F-16s, those were MiGs. So right now, we're talking about, okay, the Mirage is complicated. Slovakia, the MiG-29 fighter jets are not complicated. Ukraine also flies MiG fighter jets. They are similar enough to the MiGs that the Eastern European countries have that it's considered very easy for them to learn to fly them. If the problem were American F-16s, why aren't we giving Ukraine MiGs? We're not, because the problem is giving Ukraine fighter jets at all. That's the problem. Biden and it's Macron and Schultz. And the thing I don't know is whether it's Macron and Schultz have said, we'll leave the coalition if you give them. So Biden says, okay, what do you do? In other words, is Biden carrying their water, or is Biden part of the problem? Because I do think Biden's part of the problem. I think Biden has still got a fear of Putin. He's still got this. Remember at the beginning, and I complained about this at the beginning. You don't hear it anymore, at least. But Biden so many times at the beginning of the war said, oh, we can't give Ukraine that. That would be World War III. And we were like, will you stop talking about World War III? All you're doing is empowering Putin. You're giving Putin a talking point. He knows you're afraid. You're afraid of giving stuff lest Putin freak out. So if I'm Putin, I'm going to freak out. Thank you, Leanne. Because if I freak out and I'm Putin, you're going to think it's World War III. So anyway, keep that in mind with all the fighter jet talk. I think it's bull what we are seeing with the fighter jet talk. It's not about training. It's not about, well, at this point in time, the planes aren't really as helpful as other things. Bull. We'd be giving them MiGs, and they're already using the MiGs. So, whatever. I also have a Patreon set up, by the way. And by the way, as always, since we're going long on the news tonight, I'll go long on the Q&A, so we have ample time to do questions and answers. I have a Patreon set up as well, patreon.com/Aravosis. You can find the link in my profile. You can find the link there, aravosis.com. But Patreon's very cool because it allows you to support creators on a monthly basis, $5, $10, $25, whatever contribution. And it just comes in every month. But in the aggregate, it's kind of nice because as a creator, you know how much money's coming in. I mean, I never know day to day. You guys have been very generous with the gifts. So actually, lately, I've been able to estimate a certain amount of income each day from the gifts, which has been really nice. That helps. But Patreon's even nicer because you literally know how much is coming in. And it just keeps coming in until you cut it off. It's very easy for you to cut it off. And an added advantage is with Patreon, any Patreon subscription of $5 or more will qualify you as a VIP member of our Discord, which means you get to also participate in the VIP auction. We've got two auctions, the public auction and the VIP. VIP is a much smaller group of people. So in principle, you might have a better time or easier time getting stuff. But more generally, you're supporting my work, which helps a lot. And those who are the $25 a month auction, $25 a month supporter, which I know it's a lot. Not everybody can afford it. And by the way, my Discord's free anyway. You're totally allowed to come to the Discord, join in, have the conversations. You don't have to pay. It's just for those who can, it's an extra way of supporting me. But for those who do the $25 a month Discord, those are the ones who can join me in the monthly get together we have that we're having Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern. So thank you for that. Thank you, Cindy. And thank you. Who is that? Flower Lady and Cindy both. Thanks, guys. All right, let me keep going. Medvedev. Thank you, Vernon. So I just had to read this because he makes me laugh. I'm going to keep bringing up Medvedev because he makes me laugh, and you need to understand what a joke this guy is, okay? Medvedev is the former president of Russia way back in like the 2000s, and he was the great white hope of the West. He was the guy who was pro-Western. He was, liberal in a classical sense, meaning he wasn't like a crazy hardliner. He was, opening Russia to the West, all this kind of stuff. Thank you, Me95, for the cap. Well, crazy. He is probably Putin's biggest defender right now. Thank you, Loyalty, for that. And who's the spirits here for the donut? And who's the, sorry, I'm looking really quick. Oh, the rose. Bonnie for the rose. Thank you, guys. Medvedev is terrible. He's the one who nonstop has been talking about nuking the West. And as I said, it's a joke. It's a joke. They're not nuking us. We got nukes. They got nukes. They nuke us. We nuke them back. The best way to put this is, if you're afraid of getting nuked by Russia, they are equally afraid of getting nuked by us. And that's why it's never going to happen, because they know what you know, right? They know what you know. If a nuclear war starts, we all die. Well, thank you, Dawn, for that. It's not like that's some secret that we all know that nobody told the Russians. They know we all die if there's a nuclear war. It's not going to happen. I'm sorry. I'm very adamant about this, and I know some people aren't, but it ticks me off. People like Medvedev always trying to scare everybody. Thank you, Me95, for the confetti. So listen to what he said today. He just makes me laugh, this guy. Listen to this. And mind you, I told you about this. I told you every other day, this guy's going to come up with something crazy to say, and he's doing it on the mark. 2 days. The deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, thank you for the heart there, Betty, Dmitry Medvedev, stated today that if combat aircraft are transferred to Ukraine and they are in any way resupplied or repaired in a NATO country such as Poland, then this would mean the direct entry of this country into the war. As I put on, I wish I had my little GIF with me right now to go, sure, Jan. Really? You and what army? But seriously, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? You going to attack Poland? Poland's a member of NATO. We've got nukes. You attack Poland, you're at war with NATO. You can't even beat Ukraine. You really think you're going to drag NATO into the war? If the Russians can't beat Ukraine, and however you really think the war is going, okay, it's not going great for Russia. Even if you think Ukraine's having a hard time, I'm kind of more in the middle. It ain't going well for Russia. This is a 3-day war, Russia thought, and we're now in day like 368 of a 3-day war. It ain't going well. Imagine what's going to happen to Russia if the U.S. enters the war, the British enter the war, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Norwegians, and I'm sure I'm missing some of the others that are also Poland that have great militaries as well. Russia will cease to exist if we enter the war. There's no way. And as far as a nuclear conflict, they're not using nukes because we've got nukes too. So they're not going to do that. I mean, it's just, but again, it's all psychological warfare. They want to scare us. They are afraid that we may give jets. And the problem is, I still worry about Biden, France, and Germany, about our leaders. I worry that they hear things like that and go, oh, that's scary. That's scary. Maybe they will attack Poland. Maybe we shouldn't do it. What are they going to do? They're not attacking Poland. By the way, all the other stuff is already getting fixed. Czech Republic, I believe, has been, or is it Slovakia or both, have been fixing things like tanks and other vehicles for months now. Ukraine's been sending their broken down weapons, and they've been getting fixed already in the surrounding NATO countries. So why, if Medved's telling the truth, why haven't they attacked all these other NATO countries that have been fixing all the offensive weapons from Ukraine? Because he's a liar. And they do say he's probably an alcoholic as well. So let me look really quick. The last, two last stories. Putin signed a law today banning government officials from using most foreign words. Now, before I laugh at that, I will say the French do similar things, and Quebec ain't so happy too about using English. So, I like to mock the Russians, but on this one, I remember when I was living in France, I was studying in France. I did my junior year abroad all the way back in 1983, 1984. And at that time, the government had just banned, but not banned for the public, but it was the what do you call it? The Académie Française, which is like the great people who keep an eye on the French language. And they had decided that the word hamburger was getting too popular in French in the 1980s because McDonald's was really doing well. And McDonald's sort of shocked everybody that it was doing well in France. And then France started having copycats of McDonald's. And nobody thought McDonald's would do well in France, right? They started having copycats in France. And the French decided that instead of hamburger, this was in the 1980s, instead of the word hamburger, the word for hamburger would be deux morceaux de pain avec de la viande au milieu. 2 pieces of bread with meat inside. I mean, that was literally the word. It's like German. Instead of hamburger, 2 pieces of bread with meat inside. People were saying computer. They changed it to ordinateur. What was it for email? Email is, what is email? It's not facteur. What do you call email? It's not logiciel. Like software is logiciel. I forget what email is in French. Is it, or do you guys use email? Courriel, voilà, courriel. But I mean, some of it I can understand, but like computer, it's ordinateur because computer was getting a little too popular. But I love that. Hamburger, 2 pieces of bread with meat on the inside. I mean, it's the thing is, it's almost, it's like something the Soviets would come up with because the Soviets used to, this, one of the interesting things going into the Soviet Union, Russia probably still has this, but all the stores were named after what they sell. So like the bookstore was like Knigi, Dom Knigi still exists, House of Books. Okay. The bread store, I think was Chlep, wasn't it? Wasn't the bread store called? They literally were called like bread. I mean, it was as dour of an existence as you can imagine, but it just made me think of that. It's not a hamburger. It's 2 pieces of bread with meat inside, which of course then sounds like a sandwich, right? What is a sandwich if not 2 pieces of bread with meat inside? Anyway, you get the idea. I don't mean to, so that's what I'm saying. I'm actually, in all fairness, I'm saying, the French do this, the Quebecois do it. And frankly, I only half mock the French and the French and the Quebecois because I understand where they're coming from. I mean, I get it. To some degree, you do worry about your language getting so watered down by foreign words to a degree, or burger. I have a hard time saying burger. The other word I could never say in French were Marlboros. Marlboro cigarettes, which I didn't smoke, but Marlboros were very popular. And trying to say, finally, French person told me, skip the R. So it's Marlboro. And then I was like, oh, Marlboro I can do. But I kept the first R. I kept trying to do Marlboro. And it was just a disaster. But anyway, French, foreign languages. I love foreign languages, but damn, they're hard. The final thing, this was actually kind of a bad story, but I wanted to put it in here because it's important. All right. First of all, I'm going to pull something up. We had talked yesterday about, actually, ironically enough, that this story came up because we had talked about Andrei Sakharov. And I mentioned Andrei Sakharov yesterday because I was talking about when I wrote a letter to Brezhnev, who was the Soviet premier, because I was pissed at the way that he was treating Andrei Sakharov when I was 14. Let me tell you a little bit about who he was really quick because it's important, but it's also, actually, it's very important anyway for history, but it's also relevant to the story I'm going to tell you. Andrei Sakharov was a Soviet nuclear physicist, dissident, Nobel laureate, and activist for nuclear disarmament, peace, and human rights. He became renowned as the designer of the Soviet Union's RDS-37, a code name for Soviet development of thermonuclear weapons. So big deal in the Soviet nuclear movement for developing the nukes. Sakharov later became an advocate of civil liberties and civil reforms in the Soviet Union, for which he faced state persecution. These efforts earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1975, the Sakharov Prize, which is but they really abused this guy. And finally, I believe he got, I'm trying to remember if he got out. That's the one thing I'm forgetting. Yeah, he was sent into internal exile. Sakharov was arrested on January 22nd, 1980, following his public protests against the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan in 1979, and was sent to the city of Gorky, a city that was off limits to foreigners. So they sent him into exile internally. Anyway, what was interesting is, and horrible, the Sakharov Center A museum in Moscow named for the Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov was forced to close amid Russia's wartime purge of human rights activists. The center has until the end of April to dismantle its museum exhibition focused on the repression of the Soviet Gulag and to remove Sakharov's archives and his bust. They can't even have a museum talking about the excesses of the Soviet gulags, of Stalin, of all the political prisoners that the Soviets had. They would take these political prisoners, and I mean, these guys were in hard labor camps. It was horrific. Things have gotten so bad in Russia now that Putin thinks that is a risk to his regime, talking about how horrible the Soviet Union was. This is what worries me about what is happening in Russia today. They are, it's cancel culture, but cancel culture is almost too light of a word for it. These guys are becoming the Soviet Union again. We are seeing, Florida. I mean, we're seeing weird stuff in Florida too, frankly. There was something today I saw. God, what did I see today? Oh, there was some legislation today now that the governor of Florida, who wants to run for president, Republican, he wants to force bloggers in the state who are critical of him of having to register with the state. I mean, crazy. But in Russia, they send you to prison. I mean, it's one step further, but still really scary what's going on over there. But from my perspective, Russia turning back into a dictatorship and Russia turning back into the Soviet Union, the lesson we learned with the Soviets wasn't they need a hug. That wasn't the lesson we learned. The lesson we learned was you got to stand up to these guys or you empower them. And in the end, you can win. But, you know, it takes a battle with these guys. And I feel that is why, for me, Ukraine is so important. I mean, not so important. I care about the Ukrainians and I care about human rights. But it is why I take such a hard line towards the Russians, because I remember them as the Soviets. And these are not people where, you know, like I said, you give them a hug and maybe they'll be nicer to you. That's not the way it works. All right, let's go. I'm banging on the table again. Sorry, dog. Let's go and do our questions. Boy, we really went long on that. Well, you know, we had a lot of questions too. Let's do our questions. We're going long tonight. I'm not going to do the Discord tonight because obviously we did long on this. On TikTok, throw your questions into the Q&A in my profile. The rest of you obviously use the box at the bottom. I certainly don't object to you keeping the gifts coming in, so please do. All right, let's get rolling here. All right, let me start with TikTok. Hang on, make sure I didn't miss one here. Oh, I did see that one. Yep. All right. Oh, hello. Thank you for the glasses. Was it Betty, Tom, Marcy? I think I got you guys, all three there. Oh, Mom tried to call. Of course, Mom tried to call. What a surprise. I'll have to call Mom in a minute. Mom always tries to. It's been a while that Mom hasn't tried to call me in the whole during the show. Mom used to always call in the middle of my show. With the current House, is Biden even able to send jets to Ukraine? Thank you, Valerie, for those. Since the MAGA Republicans are basically the deciding vote there. Thank you, Big Gator. I don't know well enough how that works. I will tell you that it has been a bit of a black box for me trying to understand the different authority that Biden does or doesn't have in terms of weapons he can send. You know, we know we've got this sort of lend-lease thing where Biden seems to have the authority to send a number of things to Ukraine that he doesn't have to get congressional permission for. But I don't understand to what degree that is or isn't. I don't know. I just don't know. Thank you, Henry. And it's still, I mean, to this day, every time there's a new weapons package, it still confuses me to what degree Congress approved it or whether Congress just approved, for example, that $45 billion that was approved over the holidays. But I think it was $20 billion for weapons. Did it specify the weapons or did it specify $20 billion for weapons at the president's discretion, for example, right? I just don't know. I mean, I hate to give those answers, but to be honest, now one thing the Republicans could do is they could try to legislatively stop Biden from doing it, but they're not going to get away with it because Democrats control the Senate. So they couldn't really stop it that way. But if Biden needed congressional approval, then you could have a problem. You are correct. McChicken, I get the sense you did have a question. That's what I thought. Okay. How do you think the election of 2024 will turn out? God only knows. Thank you, Betty and Steven. God only knows. I mean, I really don't know. I will say Biden has been doing better than I expected, in the sense that look at 2022 in America. These congressional elections should have been a blowout. I mean, we all know this, but maybe some of you who aren't American weren't as up on it. The presidency is every 4 years, okay? But every 2 years, we have congressional elections. It's a little complicated. Senators are elected every 6 years, but they're tiered, a third every 2 years, right? So every 2 years, there are Senate elections, but it's different people because they get a 6-year term. House of Representatives, it's a 2-year term. So everybody in the House of Representatives is up for election every 2 years. Typically, when you have a party in power, thank you, Annie, for those. That's very generous of you. Typically, when you've got a party in power, the other guy does very well in the congressional elections that are called the midterm elections, meaning the elections that happen halfway through the presidency. So Biden's elected in 2020. Biden's term goes to 2024. So the midterm election is the 2022 election, right in the middle. That election should have been a disaster for Democrats and a slaughter for Republicans. Thank you, Jens, for that. It wasn't. The Democrats did very well in the Senate, and in the House, the Republicans took control of the House, but only by like 5 seats or something like that, 5 or 6 seats. The Republicans were supposed to win the House by 40 seats. So yes, they won, but it was still a disaster of an election. Thank you, Hazel. And that gives me pause because I didn't think Biden was I thought Biden did a good job as president. I thought Biden did a bad job communicating what he's done. Okay. Yet for some reason, we went to the polls and the public said, we really don't like these Republicans. In the House, they still liked Republicans more than Democrats, but they really didn't like Republicans, or the Republicans should have done much better. So for 2024, I feel like I'm almost confused a little because I worry that somebody like to tell you my druthers, but somebody like a Ron DeSantis might win. But the public has surprised me a few times already that if the Republicans come off too extreme, the public really doesn't like it. So the question, I think, for 2024, less so than Biden and whether Biden is, looks like he's with it enough, is how much can the Republicans control the crazy side of the party? And I mean the Marjorie Taylor Greene and company. She clearly wants to be the face of the party, and she's becoming the face of the party. I don't think that helps Republicans. I don't think it's liberal of me to say so. I suspect most Republicans would agree with me. She's probably not the person you want as out there representing you, right? And to the degree to which she does that could help Democrats a lot. So there you go. I mean, who knows? Who knows? Super sticker. Thank you, Arabella. Sweet of you. To make sure there's not any. Okay, let me pull up a TikTok question. Boom, TikTok question. These are my glasses. How worried are you about Russian interference in 2024? I mean, I'm worried. The thing that the Russians were very good at is they tried to do a lot of the screwing around with Facebook and everything else. It's not clear whether that helped or not. Thank you, a dozen. What certainly helped was stealing the Democratic National Committee's files. That helped. That helped a lot. And that it helped get Trump elected. Whether without it, Trump would have gotten elected. I mean, it's always hard to know because it's like the weather. There's so many different reasons people win and people lose elections, but it clearly didn't help. And I worry about the Russians doing more dirty tricks like that come 2024. They're certainly going to try. They certainly don't like Biden. They certainly do like Trump. I don't know where they're going to be on somebody like DeSantis. The only thing is DeSantis seemed okay on Ukraine, and recently he's gotten worse, which is too bad. Thank you, Happy Beach, for that. He's getting worse. He used the line the other week of basically, do you either support Ukraine and the woke blah blah, or you support defending America's border. But it was like, why would you take Ukraine and try to make it like Ukraine's the enemy? And Ukraine, not to mention, but Ukraine is part of the culture wars. It's not. And that's incredibly dangerous. Frankly, I'm not impressed with the man because I think he's mean. And I think his politics are mean. And I think worse than that, I don't want to get too political because I like that we get Democrats and Republicans agreeing on the Ukraine stuff, but I'll just say, I think he's motivated by mean, and that's what worries me. I think he tries to pick issues to talk about that he's being mean about, and I don't like that. And I think he should leave Ukraine alone and don't try to make Ukraine one of your woke issues. And he's trying to do it, and that scares me. And my point I was bringing it up is if Russia sees more of that, maybe Russia would try to intervene because they'd say, you know what? This guy coming in doesn't want to keep funding Ukraine. It's better than Biden, who wants to keep funding Ukraine. I don't know. There's all sorts of stuff with the Trump campaign. I mean, trust me. Let me see here. Oh, that's interesting. Some reports say Kadyrov has kidney failure and a specialist has been flown in from the UAE to treat him. I mean, who knows? Kadyrov's the lunatic from Chechnya. I mean, who knows? I also don't know to what degree, there's Dom. To what degree it would make a difference if he died anyway? Would it really make a difference to the war effort? I mean, he's a jerk. I think a lot of people would celebrate him disappearing because he's, one of the top people working with Putin who's just a jerk and a murderer. So there would not be a lot of love lost, but still. User, you can pose questions. I mean, you could ask one right here, but sometimes I can't see them and they go flying by. It's a little easier to ask questions on TikTok by going to my profile and looking at the Q&A link, because that way at least I'm able to pull them up and see the questions in a row. On the screen, they kind of fly by, so I don't always get to see them there. Domenicini or Domenichini. I will never learn how to pronounce your name. Maybe Chini. Key should be CCH. From my knowledge of Italian. The US and Russia had their highest level talks today since the start of the invasion. Correct. Did anything come from them? Well, it was very interesting. So today, I mentioned at the top of the show that today at the G20 summit, Brandy, I see you there. Thank you for that. At the G20 summit, our Secretary of State, Blinken, met with the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. They met for under 10 minutes, but they did meet. They did talk. That's interesting and it's good. I mean, talking is good. Even if we were mortal enemies with the Soviets, but we talked. Talking is always good. It's one of the reasons that there's concern about China, because China keeps refusing to talk to our general that calls their general, and they keep refusing, which, that kind of stuff is stupid. It's not beneficial. So it's good they talked. They only talked for 10 minutes. The U.S. said, stop fighting the war. Thank you, Grouchy, for that. Stop fighting the war. Release Paul Whelan, and you should be in the arms control agreements, right? You shouldn't pull out of the arms control agreements. Could they have talked about something else? I don't know, right? Could they have exchanged a secret note of some kind? Maybe. I do think it's interesting that they talked. We just don't know whether anything significant comes of that. I do think, though, that the fact that they talked at least means they may talk again, because at least the precedent has been set that, yes, we can be kind of at war with each other in Ukraine, but two of our top government officials can still talk to each other. Like, that's allowed. So it means it's allowed next time they want to talk too. So again, it's a good thing. Maybe it will lead to more talking. I don't know what talking helps like for Ukraine, but maybe it'll help us get rid of some of the hostages like Paul Whelan, Brandy is saying, do you think China will send weapons to Russia? Should we be concerned? We should be concerned. From what I'm reading, a lot of the experts don't think China's going to do it because they really don't want things to blow up with the US and Europe any more than they are already, because they're worried about their economy. They're worried about the economic trade with US and Europe, much less trade with Russia. Then you've got people like, I was watching Lieutenant Colonel Layton on, former Lieutenant Colonel, American, on CNN. Oh, hello, you. Dog wants to wander. On CNN this weekend. And Layton, from what I remember, Layton said he thinks the Chinese are going to do it. He thinks they're going to support Russia. That would be bad. China has a lot of ability to do that. That would be bad. They would be able to help Russia a lot. Now, that would mean a lot more pressure on us to give Ukraine the longer range weapons we've been refusing to give them. Get the tanks to them even faster if we can, though that's question. Wait, did the jury already found him guilty already? They submitted it to the jury like 3 hours ago. Let me just say, not that I care. For all of you in the rest of the world, my country has been transfixed on the murder case of some guy who apparently, if this is true now, murdered his wife and son. Personally, I couldn't care less. Yeah, I care. I care about every murder case, of course. But CNN literally spent the entire day the other day with this guy's trial on, and I'm trying to find out what's going on in Ukraine and the rest of the world. And it's literally the trial of some white guy who killed his wife and son. And I'm just like, why do I care? I just don't. I don't care. No, but you know what I mean? One of those things where, and you don't mean you don't care. Yeah, I care about loss of life. It ain't a 24-hour story on CNN. Anyway, so they had given it to the jury only a couple hours ago, and he's guilty already, which means there wasn't even a discussion. From the beginning, they knew this guy was guilty. But nonetheless, I'm so over it. So anyway, enough of this guy. So yeah, we should be concerned if China gives weapons to Ukraine. One wild card I think that's going to be interesting is the Republicans. The Republicans hate the Chinese. I mean, loathe the Chinese. I'm not sure what it is. Part of it is the communist thing, although frankly, they're fine with Putin being former KGB, so who knows? And they're fine with Russia, which is the follow-on to the Soviet Union. But nonetheless, they hate China. Whenever they talk about China, they refer it to the Chinese Communist Party. They don't say China did something. They say the Chinese Communist Party sent a balloon over America. They really, really try to make it sound as bad as possible. Well, if China starts giving lethal weapons to Russia to win a war in Europe, that would mean the Chinese Communist Party is trying to influence a war in Europe. That's something Republicans care about. They don't like the Chinese Communist Party mucking around. So that's the one thing that could be very interesting. That's the one thing that could be interesting, is whether this makes it much more difficult for Republicans to back off from the war, because now China's a party to the war, a real party to the war. One good thing I will say, which has been really interesting, I saw I forget his name, but the top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee, Select Committee on Intelligence, whatever, and the top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and both of them excellent on Ukraine. Excellent on Ukraine. The guy about intelligence was on today. He was today or yesterday. He was great. So that's good. I'm glad to see that. So I think, let's see. But like I said, it's going to be very difficult for Republicans to keep attacking Ukraine. It's going to be much more difficult for them to keep attacking Ukraine once China gets involved, if they get involved. Hope they don't get involved, because it's also going to make it much harder for Ukraine, which we don't want, but thank you for that, Brandy. Brandy, did I say Brandy? Brandy, whichever, both. Just scrolling down. Jim Jordan, don't even, let me look. Excuse me. A couple more TikTok questions too. Yeah, whatever. Well, that's the question. User 013588 is asking, what's fair for Ukraine to concede in order to end the war? Should they concede anything? Who the hell knows? I mean, obviously political answer to give is that's Ukraine's decision to make. And it is. I don't see, well, okay. I think for people like, even for people like me, it's probably risky. Thank you, Betty. Because nobody who's got an audience wants to be saying too much about, well, I think Ukraine ought to give up this land, because it makes it sound like if that's all that's left. Like, for example, I think Ukraine should give up Crimea. Well, then it makes it sound like if Ukraine gets everything back but Crimea, maybe I would support ending the war. So a lot of people don't really want to give those answers because they're afraid of it helping the Russians. But in the end, it's got to be up to Ukraine, because they've got to be responsive to their own people. And so far, their own people do not want, thank you, Jessica, their own people do not want their government to give up land. So that's the first problem. Second of all, it's going to depend on Russia. Like, what will convince Russia to stop the war? It's going to depend on how well Ukraine does in the war. I mean, at the very least, we need to be giving, I think we need to be giving Ukraine weapons. At the very least, Ukraine has got to get all of this back for me, or it's a no deal. No deal. And what this means is we at least get back to where we were before the war started last year. Before the war started last year, the Russians were still holding on to Crimea, but they had none of this. I mean, they had parts of this. And frankly, Ukraine ought to get all of this back too. But at the very least, all of this comes back. And then even Zelensky was willing to discuss what to do about Crimea. He wasn't talking about giving away Crimea, but you'll recall before they discovered Bucha and everything blew up and the talk stopped, the negotiations, there was talk about maybe putting Crimea off for 15 years so that it would be discussed over a longer period of time. I think at the very least, we've got to get back to that. You've got to get back to where we were before the war. Russia cannot, at the very least, Russia cannot have gained anything from this war. And so far they have. So, but in the end, yeah, they've got to be the ones agreeing to it, but also we've got to be the ones that also have enough fortitude to keep helping Ukraine. And frankly, we're not helping them enough. Like I said, we're worried that Ukraine may not be, that the war may go on for a while. Well, no, Sherlock. We're not giving them planes and we're not giving them long-range weapons. Big surprise, the war is going to go on for a while. This is a surprise. Well, okay, Rob is saying, I heard a possible negotiation start. Russia withdraws from East Crimea. From East Crimea becomes Russian. Well, East Crimea would be the part that would stay Russian, I would think, right? Because East Crimea is going to be over here touching Russia. So you'd think the Russians would want this. Now, having said that, Russia wants Sevastopol. They want the port here. So maybe that's why they want the East. But it almost makes more sense for them to have this connected by land, but this is strategically more important. And Ukraine joins NATO. Now, again, I'm not convinced NATO is going to do it. But if Ukraine is admitted into NATO, all of Ukraine's problems end because Russia can't touch them. The problem is all of the territorial disputes have to end. They have to be done for Ukraine to join NATO. So that means Ukraine deciding, is there anything it would give up in order to join NATO? And that may never happen, but I will say this, Ukraine joining NATO is a hell. I don't think NATO would do it, but Ukraine joining NATO, that's a hell of as far as Ukraine's future, that's huge. And I would argue that's more important than land, depending how much land. Personally, I wouldn't force it on them, but the problem is going to be NATO's never going to do it. I think you got to get all 30 NATO countries to agree. Hungary? Oh, you think Hungary's going to do it? He's not going to do it. Erdogan is going to want to, thank you, Coeur de Lion, for that. Erdogan's going to want each of us to give up our first child. He's going to totally hold us hostage. Orban's going to do the same thing. Well, NATO's not dead. NATO's actually NATO is actually helping win the war in Ukraine right now. So NATO certainly isn't dead, but it's getting very difficult to get things done because of these idiots like Orban and Erdogan in Turkey, you know. But interesting. Oh, gives up all of Ukraine, Rob was saying. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Yeah. So just looking here, what else here? And we'll look at a couple more questions and then we'll call it quits. It's 20 after here. Let me look here. Deep. Any countries giving Ukraine long-range missiles? Not that we know. It depends how you define long-range. The Brits were talking about giving them longer-range cruise missiles and stuff. We promised to give them ground launch small diameter bombs, GLSDBs, that are paired with a missile and can go 94 miles or 150 kilometers. That's pretty good. It ain't 200 miles, which is what they need, which is a weapon called ATACMS, but it's half that, which is still pretty damn good. Those, we don't know if they've arrived yet. Maybe they have. Oh, hello. See, I speak Russian. Dobry вечер. So we've got a good evening from Ukraine here from somebody. Give a little hello, folks, to DLLB on YouTube, on TikTok. He's saying good evening from Ukraine. Give him some sunflowers on TikTok there. But whatever. I don't know what I was saying. I saw the little welcome. I know just enough Ukrainian and Russian that I was able to read what he was saying. Or she. Let me look. Oh. I don't know. I'm looking. I don't think we're getting any other big questions that are really well, I mean, maybe I'll stop with this. With the tanks. I mean, our tanks will sink too. The point is you can't use tanks in mud. So whether it's our tanks, whether it's German tanks or Russian tanks or anything else, thank you, Combat Medic, for the swing there. So, you just wouldn't be able to use them during the muddy season, which is now, especially through March. But then after that, you can. So they do need our tanks. They just have to be careful over the next 6 weeks, and they're not getting them over the next 6 weeks anyway. So, there. All right, guys, let me do a quick summary of the stories we covered tonight, and then I'm going to go. I will remind you all before you sign off, Saturday morning, we're doing the coffee talk, as I call it, for the subscriber-only TikTokers, the folks on TikTok who pay for a subscription. You all, I will be seeing Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time U.S., and on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time U.S., thank you, Betty. Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time U.S., I do a similar thing for the $25 and up monthly subscribers on my Discord. And that group, you just look for it's in the VIP section. You'll see it. It's in the VIP section. It says John's Get Together or something like that. But I'll remind you again tomorrow so there's no, people don't forget. But anyway, let me tell you really quick then, like I said, the news. So huge explosion today in a town southeast, I believe, of Moscow. Whether it was the Ukrainians, interesting question. Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, and the Russian foreign minister met at the G20 summit today for about 10 minutes. Still, it was good because there hasn't been much communication between the two governments. That's a good thing. A mystery is brewing. A group of Russians seem to have crossed the border into Russia, or possibly were there already, may have attacked a Russian town. We don't know if they were working for Ukraine. We don't know if they were working for Putin, and it was a false flag, basically a trick operation to blame the Ukrainians. Nobody knows, but this is a story that seems to be brewing a little here. Bakhmut, there are more reports that the Russians are edging closer and closer, but at a massive cost. The weather is starting to play a role. As I was talking for a long time about the weather, but basically the ground is starting to melt and get muddy, and that starts to make it very difficult for tanks and other heavy vehicles to get around. So if you're trying to advance, that ain't great. If you're defending, better, because you're sitting in one place, though you are sitting in a very wet, muddy place, which is not fun. The Guardian reports that Russian torture chambers in Kherson Oblast in Ukraine have been discovered 20 different torture chambers that were part of a systematic effort by the Russians to basically eliminate the Ukrainian culture. In response to the 12 drone attack across Russia yesterday, one of which got pretty close to Moscow. Thank you, Hazel, for that. The Russians set up a mobile radar station for air defense installed near the Moscow metro. Slovakia is considering giving Ukraine 10 of its 11 Soviet-era MiG jets. Thank you, James. France is saying they're considering giving their Mirage fighter jets, but as I said, considering doesn't mean a lot to me. I want to, where's the proof, right? Where's the beef? Medvedev, the former Russian president, made more threats. It's what he does, but I bring up his threats because they make me laugh. Putin signed a law banning officials from using most foreign words. And finally, the Sakharov Center, a museum in Moscow named for Soviet dissident Andrei Sakharov, which focuses on highlighting the repression of the Soviet Gulag, is being forced to close by the Russians because they don't want you to know the truth. You can't handle the truth. So kind of scary. All right, guys, thank you so much as always. I will be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. We do the same thing. We hang out. We'll talk about the latest news, and then we'll take your guys' questions and comment on it. Today's Thursday. Yeah, it's Friday. And then, like I said, the weekend, we've got the other stuff going on. And do check out the links in my profile. Like I said, you'll find the Discord where you can check out the auctions, the Patreon where you guys can support my work. I've got my LinkedIn in case you're really geeky and want to know my background, but lots of fun stuff. So thank you guys. This has been, as always, fun. And now I'm going to, the dog, I can't quite get the dog. She's roaming. She's getting some water. It's time for me to brush the dog's teeth. So she kind of roams around this time. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow. Thank you, mods, as always, for what you did. And thank you all for the gifts, as always. Very generous. Hey, I was reaching down to grab her, and she hates it when I grab her. She literally was coming right by me, and I reached down, and she just, can we come here? Can we say hi? Oh, come on. She laid down in the bed underneath me, and I went to get her, and she just ran. She hates when I pick her up. Absolutely hates when I pick her up. So sorry about that. You guys were asking for the dog. I almost got you the dog. She's a little, and if you can see here, she's all the way back in her bed back there now. You can see at the very corner under my TV. You guys can. She climbed all the way back there to get a, actually, you guys can see too. Wait, where's the, I may not be able to, it's the opposite. I keep forgetting. Oh my God, I can't do this. Nope. There she is. There she is for you guys too. Sasha is right there on her super bed, hiding from me. She was underneath the chair and now she moved to the far side of the room. Oh, this is what happens when you own a terrier. Terriers are just like, they know what they want, they know what they don't want, and you do not mess with them. All right, guys, have a good night. I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much. All right, bye-bye.